Hi, I'm Nikki from Find Me Crafting. What do you do if your college-age daughter asks you for Twilight-themed oven mitts? Well, if you're me, you dive headfirst into finding the perfect fabric, and you get really excited because this is what I live for: custom, personal, handmade gifts that you can't find in stores. Come on, let me show you how easy it is to make a set of your own. Let's talk about what you're going to need for supplies. You're going to want to start by printing out the free template. It does print on 2 different pages. You want to make sure that when you print, you are selecting actual size from your printer settings. Mine will automatically default to something that says fit to printable area. That does mess with the sizing of the template. So select actual size. And if you want to double check and make sure it's printed at the right size, you can just measure the little box. It should measure 1 inch by 1 inch. You are then going to want to cut out the 2 pieces, line them up with the triangles, and tape your template together. You also need some fabric, and most of the supplies that we are going to be using in the oven mitt will be 100% cotton. This is going to be my interior. This is my exterior. They are both 100% cotton, and each of these needs to be cut at 15 inches tall by 10 inches wide. You're going to have 2 pieces of the exterior and 2 pieces of the interior for each oven mitt. From your interior fabrics, you're also going to want to cut a strip that is 2 1/4 inches wide by about 17 or 18 inches long. If you're adding a hanging loop, you also want another piece from your interior. This one's cut at 2 inches wide and 5 inches long. You're also going to want some of this batting-like material. It's called Insul-Bright. It has a metallicized film in it that reflects hot or cold. These are also going to be cut to 10 inches wide by 15 inches long, and you need 2 pieces again. You need some cotton batting. Once again, you're going to need 2 pieces. They are also cut to 10 inches wide by 15 inches long. I'm using Pellon Wrap and Zap. It is a 100% cotton batting. You're going to want some 100% cotton thread and a sewing machine. You're going to want a cutting mat, a large sewing ruler, and a rotary cutter. In addition to cutting, you're going to be using this ruler to create the quilted lines on the oven mitt. You're also going to want some fabric scissors and a fabric marking tool. You need some fabric clips and or fabric pins, an iron and ironing board. You're going to want a tape measure. And optionally, something that is quite useful for this project is a sewing stiletto. And another optional item is a walking foot for your sewing machine. I did not need this to sew through the layers with my machine, but if your machine is struggling to get through all the layers of fabric, this can help you out quite a bit. I'm going to start by doing a little bit of prep work on my binding strip and the hanging loop so that they're ready for later. I'm going to start with the binding strip. I'm going to fold it in half with the wrong sides together and press that with my iron. That's all we're going to do with that for right now, so you can set that to the side and grab your hanging loop piece. We want to start by folding it in half, wrong sides together, and ironing it. Then you want to open it up and fold one side up to meet that line that you just made and press that in place. I'm going to turn it around, do the same thing with the other side. And now you want to fold the whole thing in half again so that all your edges are finished off. And I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm just going to sew down my open side with a 1/8 inch seam to close that side up. Now what we need to do is quilt all 4 layers of the fabric and batting together. We're going to do that before we cut out the shape of the oven mitt. 1, because it's a lot less cutting, makes it a lot easier. 2, because when you quilt the top of this, the batting does shrink up just a little bit, and it makes it fit much nicer if you quilt it first and cut it later. So we're going to make a fabric sandwich with all of our fabrics. We're going to start by putting the exterior down pretty side down, so face down. Then we want to lay on the cotton batting. There's no right or wrong side to this, so it doesn't matter which way you lay it. Then we want to put on the Insul-Bright, which also does not have a right or wrong side, so you can lay that either way you want. And then on top, we want our interior fabric to be right side up. And we're going to get all of that laid together. You can clip it in a few places if you like to make sure everything stays put. And we want to baste it together. We want to make sure that as we are quilting, for especially the first couple stitches, the first couple rows, we are not going to have our fabric shifting around. You can use basting spray for this. I'm not a big fan of the sprays, so I'm just going to run a 1/8 inch seam down the top and bottom here just to hold it in place while I'm quilting. As you're sewing on top of all 4 layers, you want to keep in mind that it will work best if you increase your stitch length a little bit. Mine is set at about a 2.5, 3-ish area. Now what we're going to do is quilt this side of the oven mitt. I am going to quilt from the back side. This way I can draw on my lines, and if there's any leftover lines at the end, you're not going to see them because it's on the inside. And also my inside, my interior fabric is a lot less busy than my exterior, so it's a lot easier to see. I'm going to pick a corner and draw on my first line, probably about 1.5 inches from the corner. And I'm just going to pick an angle that I like, that I will be copying for the rest of the back here. And I'm just going to draw my line. Then I'm going to move my ruler up, and I want to make my next line the same angle. So I'm going to line the line I drew up with the line on my ruler, and I'm going to go 2 inches out from that first line and draw on my next line. And you want to keep drawing on lines until you have reached the opposite corner. Now I've got my lines for one direction completed. I'm going to flip it around, and I'm going to draw the same 2-inch lines going the opposite direction. So we form a grid. So I'm going to start down here in the corner. Once again, my first one is going to be about 1.5 inches in. And then I'm just going to place lines every 2 inches until I reach the opposite corner. I will say, if you don't want to draw on the lines, obviously you can just wing it. You can just try to eyeball your lines and create it without drawing on your grid. You could do straight up and down lines. You could do some sort of crazy pattern, whatever you like. I just have zero confidence in my ability to sew these lines straight if I don't draw on the lines. So this is what works for me. Now I'm ready to take the whole thing to the sewing machine and actually sew down my lines. You need to start and end each line from the same direction. So I'm going to start up here. I'm going to stitch down this line. Now, it is tempting to flip your fabric around, start at the next line, and go this direction. But that can pucker your fabric because your feed dogs are going to be feeding your fabric in different directions depending on which way you're sewing. So each one of my lines is going to start on this side and come down. Then I'm going to stop, cut my threads, the whole thing, and start again at this side and come this way. Once I get all of these done, I'm going to flip it around. I'm going to start at one end and do the other side. Once you get one side quilted, this is what the back of mine looks like. It is time to do the other side of the oven mitt, the exact same process. You're going to make the fabric sandwich, you're going to draw on your lines, and you're going to quilt the entire piece. Once you get both sides quilted, it's time to get out your template. We are going to trace the template onto the back of the oven mitt, the quilted pieces that you just made. I'm going to trace the template onto one side, and then we want to mirror it on the other side. So flip your template over and trace it onto the second quilted piece of fabrics. Grab your fabric scissors and now cut out your oven mitt out of the fabric on the line that you just traced. One additional tip before you do any cutting, make sure that when you're tracing your template that your fabric is facing the right direction if you have a directional print. Now lay your oven mitts right sides together, pretty exterior fabrics together. Line everything up and then clip it all together. Take this to the sewing machine and you want to sew all the way around the outside except for the cuff area. You don't want to sew this closed, but you're going to do the rest of the outside with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. When you get to this thumb area, you're going to want to just do a little swoop around that corner, and using a stiletto can be quite handy when you're trying to sew all these bulky layers together and keep them all in line. Now in between the thumb and the rest of the hand, you want to clip right up next to your stitch line there. Do not cut the stitch line. Now we're going to work on the binding before we flip it right side out. So you still want it inside out at this point. You want to grab your tape measure and measure around the cuff area of your oven mitt all the way around. And keep in mind that when you do this measurement, I'm going to be opening up my seam as I sew on my binding. So you want to measure it with the seam opened up. Measure to the other side, and mine's about 14 inches. And from that, I'm going to add on a 1/2 inch. So 14.5 is my magic number for my binding. And I'm going to grab that binding strip that we ironed in half at the beginning, and we want to cut this to 14.5 inches long. I'm going to open this up and take this to my sewing machine and sew the short ends together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You want to open that seam up and iron it. Now you want to flip that right sides out and fold it again along that line that we ironed into it at the beginning. We are going to be lining up the raw edges of the binding with the raw edges of our oven mitt. So I'm going to put the seam that I just made against one of the seams in the oven mitt. I'm going to slide this on. And now we want to line up those raw edges and clip this in place. Remember, we're opening up the side seams. And just clip it so that the raw edge is even with the raw edge of your oven mitt. Now we want to bring it to the sewing machine, and you want to sew around that raw edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you can do that in one of two ways. You can do this from the inside of the cuff. So you would put it into your sewing machine just like this and do a 1/4 inch seam as you rotate the oven mitt. Or if you have a removable piece, or you have a smaller arm or whatever you would call this on your sewing machine, you can take that off and the oven mitt will most likely fit around it like it does mine. And then you would just sew your 1/4 inch seam like this. I already have it positioned like this, so I'm just going to do mine like this. It's usually a good idea to start at your side seams so that all of your seams are kind of ending and starting in the same place. And if you end up with a little bit extra because, like me, you have stretched your cotton as you were pulling it around, you can just fold it over to meet that side seam, and we're going to sew it together and you're not going to notice. Now it's time to flip the whole thing right side out. And this does take a little bit of working because it's so stiff because of all the fabrics. But you want to see if you can roll all of that stuff that's inside to the outside. Once you've wrestled your oven mitt into submission, then you want to grab your binding and kind of pull it out of the inside and just flip it over that raw edge and pin it or clip it in place. And the last step is to sew right near the edge of your binding all the way around to secure it. And if you want to add a hanging loop, you're going to want to put that in the binding before you sew it, unlike me. I had to open up a little section here. I'm opening it up near one of the side seams. You're going to fold it over. I'm going to cross it so it looks a little more like an open loop. You want to put that in your binding down near the very edge of your mitt, clip it in place, and then just when you would attach the binding, sew right over this loop and have it in place. If you enjoyed this project, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more fun, beginner-friendly sewing tutorials. Happy crafting!